Marissa Daniels was the perfect housewife, at least. That's what everyone on Willow Creek Lane believed. Liam Johnson was the quiet, helpful boy next door. But behind closed doors, their secret affair twisted into a deadly plan that would leave a husband dead, a neighborhood in shock, and 2 lives destroyed. This is the chilling true crime story of how forbidden desire turned into cold-blooded murder. Marissa Daniels had always believed that her life on Willow Creek Lane was the kind of existence other people envied. From the outside, it certainly looked that way. She lived in a white 2-story colonial with tidy hedges and flower beds that bloomed in every season. She had a husband, Carl, who worked as a financial consultant and provided everything she and their 2 daughters could ever need. But as the years passed, Marissa's days became quieter, her nights longer, and the walls of her beautiful home seemed to close in on her daughters. Hannah and Sophie were away at boarding school, a decision Carl insisted on to give them the best education. Marissa missed them fiercely, but tried to keep herself busy. She cleaned the same spotless rooms over and over, organized the pantry until every label faced forward, and spent hours scrolling through social media. Wondering if this was all there was left to look forward to, she baked for the neighbors, hosted charity luncheons, and put on her friendly smile even when she felt hollow inside. Then came the for sale sign next door, and with it, a small flutter of hope. For months, the house had stood empty, the grass overgrown and the windows dark. When the moving truck finally arrived, Marissa watched from behind her lace curtains as the Johnson family unloaded. Box after box, they seemed ordinary enough parents. In their 40s, a teenage daughter who barely looked up from her phone, and a tall young man carrying furniture with easy strength. His name was Liam, and when he turned to glance at her window, Marissa felt a jolt she didn't expect at first. She told herself she was just curious, the way any neighbor would be. She brought over a plate of brownies as a friendly gesture, introduced herself, and welcomed them to Willow Creek Lane. The Johnsons thanked her politely, but it was Liam who lingered, asking her about the neighborhood, about which grocery store she preferred, about whether she needed help with anything around her house. He seemed eager to be useful, eager to be noticed. Over the next few weeks, Marissa found excuses to step outside whenever Liam was around. She offered him glasses of cold lemonade. When he mowed his parents' lawn, she asked if he could help her move a box in the garage or fix a loose board on the back deck. He always said yes. She liked the way he looked at her, the unguarded way he smiled, as if she were more than just another neighbor. It wasn't long before others noticed. One afternoon, Marissa overheard Mrs. Price from across the street remark that Liam spent an awful lot of time helping the widow next door. Marissa felt a flush of embarrassment, but she reminded herself she had done nothing wrong. Still, the words clung to her, and she began to wonder if people were watching her windows the same way she once watched theirs when Carl came home from his business trips. She felt even more aware of how empty their marriage had become. He was polite but distant, always tired, always buried in emails and conference calls. They slept side by side but never touched. In the stillness of those nights, Marissa would think of Liam's easy laugh and the way his eyes brightened when she thanked him. She told herself she was only imagining things, that it was just harmless attention. But a part of her knew she was already waiting for the next time she'd see him. It began so simply that Marissa almost couldn't pinpoint when things had changed. She only knew that the first time she let Liam into the house, it was raining. She stood in the doorway, listening to the patter of drops on the walkway, and saw him standing there, soaked through, holding a toolbox. He'd come over to look at a faulty cabinet hinge she'd mentioned in passing. She hesitated, thinking she should tell him to come back another day. But then she stepped aside and let him in. He walked through the kitchen, dripping water onto the tile, and she handed him a towel. She told herself it was just a neighborly favor, something any polite woman would do. But as he crouched to examine the cabinet, she found herself staring at the damp hair clinging to the back of his neck, and she felt her heart begin to race. She looked away quickly, ashamed at her own thoughts. After that afternoon, Liam started coming by more often. He always had a reason, a faucet that dripped, a shutter that needed tightening, a light bulb that flickered. Each time she thanked him with homemade cookies or lemonade, pretending it was just kindness. But their conversation stretched longer. He would linger over a glass of sweet tea, telling her about his classes at the community college, about how he wasn't sure what he wanted to do with his life. Marissa listened, fascinated. She hadn't felt this seen in years. They discovered small similarities. Both loved old movies. Both hated the noise of big cities. Both felt they were born in the wrong time. She started to look forward to his visits in a way that made her nervous. She noticed how her mood would lift when she spotted him crossing the yard. And sometimes, when he left, she'd find herself sitting in the silence of the kitchen, replaying every word he'd said. It was a Tuesday when everything shifted. Marissa had been dusting the living room when Liam knocked. She opened the door to find him holding a stack of books. He said he thought she'd enjoy them. She invited him in and set the books on the coffee table. They sat together on the sofa, flipping through the pages. The room felt too warm, and the air between them seemed charged with something she didn't dare name. When their hands brushed, she didn't pull away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She felt the blood rush in her ears, and then she looked up and saw that he was watching her the way she'd been watching him. The next moment unfolded like something inevitable. His hand moved to her cheek, tentative and gentle, and she closed her eyes. After that, there was no going back. They began meeting in secret when Carl traveled. Sometimes Liam would slip through the back door in the afternoon, and they would spend hours talking, touching, wrapped up in a haze that felt as thrilling as it did dangerous. Marissa told herself she deserved this happiness, that it was a small rebellion against the emptiness of her life. But deep down, she knew they were crossing a line, and she knew that eventually someone would find out. Marissa woke every morning with a mix of dread and anticipation. She told herself the affair was under control, that she and Liam were careful enough to keep it secret. But the more time they spent together, the harder it became to pretend they were just neighbors. She started ignoring calls from old friends and skipping the charity meetings she used to organize. Her world shrank to the walls of her house and the hours when Liam was with her. She began to imagine a future where they didn't have to hide. It sounded absurd, even to her, but the thought of living without Carl felt like freedom. She started to dwell on the idea late at night, lying beside her husband while he snored softly. It occurred to her how easy it would be to end it all, how one accident could change everything. She didn't share these thoughts at first, not even with Liam. But when he showed up one afternoon with flowers, looking at her like she was the center of his world, she finally let herself say the words out loud. At first, she only hinted that she felt trapped, that she didn't know how much longer she could stand living this way. Liam looked confused and she quickly changed the subject. But the next time, she was more direct. She told him Carl would never let her go, that he'd take the girls and the house and leave her with nothing. She said she was scared of what Carl might do if he discovered the affair. Liam listened in stunned silence. He was too young to understand how quickly desire could twist into something darker. He believed everything she said. He believed her when she claimed Carl had a temper, that she sometimes feared for her life. None of it was true. But Marissa had learned how to tell a convincing lie. She watched his face as he processed her words, as he came to the conclusion she was too cowardly to say outright. She didn't have to ask him to help her. All she had to do was let the idea hang between them like a poisonous vapor. He promised he'd never let anything happen to her. She pretended to protest, to insist he forget about it. But she didn't really mean it. In the days that followed, Marissa felt a sick thrill every time she thought about what might come next. She knew she should feel guilty. Instead, she felt as if she'd finally taken control of her life. Liam began researching ways to make a death look accidental. Late at night, he read articles about carbon monoxide poisoning, about falls down the stairs, about how to stage a burglary. He didn't realize his searches left a trail. He started carrying a notebook where he scribbled plans, times, ideas he couldn't risk forgetting. He showed the notebook to Marissa once, and she didn't even flinch. As summer slipped into autumn, they grew more reckless. Neighbors had begun to whisper, but by then, Marissa no longer cared. In her mind, she and Liam were already on the other side of what they were planning. All she had to do was wait. The evening began like so many others, with Carl returning from a trip and Marissa greeting him at the door. She took his suitcase, smiling just enough to seem sincere. He looked tired, worn out from another week of meetings and airports, and he barely noticed the way her hands trembled when she poured him a drink. She told herself it was almost over. One more night, and she could start over. After dinner, Carl went to his study to answer emails. Marissa washed the dishes slowly, methodically, as though she were performing any other routine chore. She listened to the quiet clicks of his keyboard and reminded herself to stay calm. Every few minutes, she checked the clock. Liam had promised he would come after midnight when the neighborhood was asleep. Upstairs, Carl eventually turned off the light in the study and went to bed. Marissa climbed under the covers beside him, her heart thudding so loudly she thought he might hear it. She stared at the ceiling, counting the seconds until she could slip away. When she was sure he was asleep, she got up and went downstairs, turning off the porch light and unlocking the back door. The air smelled of fallen leaves and cold night. She sat in the dark living room, listening for Liam's footsteps. Every sound made her flinch: the groan of old floorboards, the hiss of the heating vents. Minutes passed, then an hour. At last, she saw the faint outline of Liam moving through the yard. He paused at the door, then stepped inside, his face pale in the gloom. He was carrying the kitchen knife he had taken from his parents' house. For an instant, he looked at her as though waiting for reassurance. She gave him the smallest nod. They had rehearsed the plan so many times it felt inevitable. Liam moved up the stairs, careful not to make a sound. She stayed behind, gripping the arms of a chair to keep from collapsing. The moment she heard Carl's startled voice, she knew there was no turning back. A muffled thud followed, then a choked gasp. That cut off abruptly. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself not to imagine what was happening. She tried to believe this was necessary, that she was finally escaping the life that had smothered her for years. When silence returned, it felt heavier than any noise. Liam came back down, his hands slick with blood. He looked stunned, as though he'd only just realized what he'd done. She reached for him but stopped short, her fingers curling into a fist. In that moment, she understood he would always be the weak link. They had planned to make it look like a break-in, but the panic in Liam's eyes told her there was no time. Lights were already coming on in neighboring houses. Somewhere down the block, a dog started barking. Marissa stepped back, forcing herself to look shocked, her mind racing through the story she would tell the police. When the sirens wailed in the distance, she knew her perfect life had ended. but she still believed she could talk her way out of the wreckage. The police arrived within minutes. Red and blue lights flashed across the white walls as officers moved through the house. Marissa sat on the sofa, her face streaked with tears she had forced herself to summon. She told them she had been asleep downstairs when she heard noises, that she was too afraid to go upstairs. She insisted she had no idea who could have done such a thing. Liam stood in the kitchen, frozen in place. Blood spattered his shirt and hands. He didn't try to run. He didn't even speak. An officer guided him out of the house, his head bowed. Marissa watched, her thoughts spinning so fast she felt dizzy. She told herself she had to stay calm, that everything depended on the story she was about to tell. Detectives spent hours examining the scene. They found the unlocked back door and the knife still wet with Carl's blood. They collected Liam's fingerprints from the banister and the kitchen counter. Marissa kept to her version of events, repeating that she had no idea why Liam would come into her home in the middle of the night. She played the role of the devastated wife so convincingly that one of the paramedics gently squeezed her shoulder and said he was sorry for her loss. But the truth was never going to stay hidden. Within a day, police discovered text messages between Marissa and Liam. They had been careless, believing no one would ever see their secret conversations. The messages started innocently but grew darker over time. Complaints about Carl, suggestions that life would be easier without him, subtle hints that she needed someone to protect her. When detectives showed her printed copies of the messages, she felt her stomach drop. She tried to say the messages were taken out of context, that she had never meant any of it, but she saw in their eyes that they didn't believe her. Then came the notebook Liam had kept, filled with notes and diagrams. He had written Marissa's name in the margins beside words like freedom and future. He had scribbled possible dates, details about Carl's work schedule, even reminders to wear gloves. And worst of all, in the corner of one page, he had written, she promised everything would be different. The trial was scheduled within 6 months. News of the killing spread quickly, and a quiet suburb became a swarm of reporters and curious strangers. Everyone had an opinion about the woman who had convinced her young neighbor to kill her husband. People who once invited her to luncheons now turned their backs. In court, the prosecutor laid out every piece of evidence, the texts, the notebook, the browser searches, the security camera footage from a neighbor's porch that showed Liam walking into the house that night. Marissa tried to look composed, but inside she felt herself unraveling. When the verdict came, it was almost a relief. Liam was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Marissa received 35 years. As she was led away in handcuffs, she finally understood that no matter how unhappy she had been, she could never undo what she had set in motion. The life she had tried so hard to escape was gone. But so was any hope of freedom. Willow Creek Lane would never forget her name.